There's a kind of generosity that costs nothing to watch and everything to perform. It looks effortless from a distance, a smile held a second longer than necessary, an answer given with more care than the question required, a bow that lingers past the point of formality. What rarely gets discussed is the discipline required to keep giving at that level without quietly disappearing into it. Jimin built a career and a self around that exact tension. This is the story of how he learned to give everything without giving himself away. Long before the stages and the crowds, there was a smaller, quieter version of the same pattern. In interviews scattered across the years, a consistent detail surfaces a boy who noticed when someone else in the room felt overlooked and moved almost automatically to close that gap. Not performed kindness, reflexive kindness. That instinct followed him into training, into debut, into a group where 7 distinct identities had to somehow share one stage without erasing each other. Jimin's role, unspoken but visible, became the one who smoothed the edges. Where friction appeared, he absorbed it. Where energy dipped, he supplied it. The early years reward that kind of person. A group needs someone willing to give more than they take. What the early years rarely mention is the bill that comes due later. Constant giving has a shadow side rarely captured in highlight reels. It shows up as exhaustion mistaken for dedication. It shows up as a body pushed past its limits in service of a performance that has to look weightless. Jimin's history with injury, with the physical toll of perfecting choreography until his frame gave out, tells a story that goes beyond discipline. It tells a story of someone who did not yet know how to stop giving before the giving started taking from him. There is a particular danger in being the person everyone can rely on. Reliability becomes an identity, and an identity built entirely on being useful to others leaves very little room for a self that exists apart from that usefulness. For a long stretch, that appeared to be the trade Jimin had made: pour everything outward, keep almost nothing in reserve. What changes the trajectory of this kind of story is rarely a single dramatic event. More often, it is a slow accumulation of smaller recognitions, a realization that the version of generosity built on self-erasure is not sustainable, and more importantly, is not actually necessary. Something shifts in Jimin's later interviews and performances. The care for others remains fully intact. If anything, it deepens. But alongside it appears something new, a willingness to acknowledge limits, to describe struggle without immediately minimizing it, to let a performance carry vulnerability instead of only polish. This is the quiet turning point. Not a retreat from generosity, but a recalibration of it. Giving, redefined not as constant output, but as something sustainable enough to keep offering over years rather than burning through in one blinding stretch. The version of Jimin that emerges from this recalibration does something unexpected. He starts drawing lines around his time, his energy, his privacy, and frames those lines not as withdrawal, but as an extension of the same care he has always offered. A boundary, in this light, stops being the opposite of generosity. It becomes the structure that makes generosity possible to sustain. Protecting his own capacity is no longer treated as selfish. It is treated as the maintenance required to keep showing up for the people and the work that matter to him. This reframing rarely gets attention because it lacks the drama of collapse or the spectacle of overcoming. It is unglamorous. It looks from the outside like nothing changed at all. But it represents one of the harder pivots a naturally giving person can make, learning that depletion is not proof of devotion. By the time Jimin steps into solo work, into a stage built entirely around his own voice rather than a shared one, the evidence of this mastery becomes visible in the small choices. He performs with the same intensity that once left him injured, but now paired with a visible awareness of his own limits. He speaks about pressure candidly, without turning that candor into a plea for sympathy. He gives to an audience of millions and somehow still holds something back, not out of guardedness, but out of self-preservation earned the hard way. That is the art in question, not simply giving. Anyone can give until there is nothing left. The mastery is in giving at full capacity, repeatedly, over years, without hollowing out the person doing the giving. What Jimin represents, in the end, is not a lesson about idols or performance. It is a study in a much older, much harder problem: how to remain generous without disappearing into the needs of everyone around you. He did not solve it by giving less. He solved it by learning, slowly and at real cost, how to give in a way that could last.